Alright, I'm just gonna say this right up front. Pug is the best person because everyone needs to know the best place to poop when you're starting in a new office. And now that I've started off with that joke that has probably ostracized half of you from watching the rest of this video, hello everybody and welcome to my review of the second episode of She-Hulk Attorney at Law, this one titled Superhuman Law. And let's get right into it because this was a really strong episode of the show. I really enjoyed it. Not only did it give me a better sense of what this show is going to be moving forward now that we're past the kind of very quick origin story episode that they had to do last week, but on top of that, now that I do know what the show is going to look like a little bit more, I just found myself like really enjoying Tatiana Maslany carrying the show and her performance and her energy that she constantly brings. And I really love that that energy is being matched by like the style and presentation of the show itself. And I'm hoping that they can keep that up week to week because one of the issues that I saw in previous Marvel shows, and I'm thinking most specifically of Miss Marvel, the last Disney Plus show, is that each Disney show has had like a very strong style, especially in the opening episodes, that it kind of starts to lose as the show goes on. Miss Marvel, I think, like I said, directly had those very like big animated sequences that kind of just got less and less as the show went along, and I kind of was sad for it because that really kind of gave it a visual flair. And while this show, She-Hulk, doesn't necessarily have that specific visual flair for the most part, it does have that like very quick, fast energy that I think having this show be only like 20 or so minutes long a piece actually really helps benefit it. Like, I really just think this show is working well off of that style. Again, that's only 2 episodes in, so we'll see if that continues going forward or if it gets dropped off, but just that energy I'm really feeling. And I want to talk specifics in just a second, but another element, though, that I think is kind of losing me a little bit, if I'm going to be sort of talking about some negatives, is the fourth wall breaking that this show is kind of sort of using. There's one time in this episode where she breaks the fourth wall and talks to the audience, where she's sort of being led around to her new offices, and that's really it. And I know that this is an element from the comics that they're bringing in. So I know that that is sort of just something that they had to sort of bring in, or at least they felt they had to. But I really hope that if it's going to be something that they present, that there's a little bit more to it than just sort of like every so often she sort of breaks the fourth wall. I don't know. Maybe you'd argue differently, but that I feel like breaking the fourth wall is a choice that I feel needs some sort of, not necessarily like justification, like it needs to like have some like reason within the story, but I think if you're gonna have that be an element of the show, I think it needs to kind of be a little bit more present than it is so far. That's not a huge knock. We'll see if that continues on, but it's just something that I don't know. I'm a little bit mixed on just because of how infrequently it's been used in this episode. But again, we'll see if that continues. And I'll stick in negatives and then I'll go back to positives pretty much for the rest of this video. But one other negative that I do have with this episode, and I kind of brought it up in my first episode as well, is that there are a few kind of cringy little moments throughout this that kind of had me rolling my eyes, where you really felt the show was doing these like, yeah, girl power moments, or yeah, it sucks because men treat girls like this. And when I say that, I'm not sort of saying like, oh, this show hates men or anything like that. Like none of those like anti-woke people ranting about the show that think it's the worst TV show ever made, which they always feel about every Marvel show that comes out because they don't watch anything else and don't have anything else to get angry about. Anyways, hate peddlers aside, I'm not talking about it from that point of view, but there are 2 moments that kind of came to my mind here. There's a moment at the beginning where the news anchor is talking to the dude who's described She-Hulk, and he says like, oh, pretty decent. And then there's also the moment in the bar, which is, by the way, the second time we have asshole men being assholes in a bar to She-Hulk within the show, within 2 episodes, which is kind of a repeated beat. But we have the sort of the male attorney from last episode, who was sort of the mansplainer dude, come up and be kind of a jerk to her as well, and then sort of walk off. And both of those moments just feel like they just really hit you on the head with like, oh, look, men suck and they treat women badly. And again, not that those things don't happen. They have happened to me, both of those things. But I feel like the show is better when it kind of addresses things in a little bit more, I don't want to necessarily even see subtler way, but a little bit more of a nuanced way. And I think, like, for example, one of the ways that it does this that I think actually works really well is when She-Hulk gets the new job at the new attorney's office, and she's immediately coming in, and the guy in charge says something to her along the lines of like, oh, we want you to present as She-Hulk when you come to work. And this is something that a lot of women do experience when going to work. Like, they're asked to present a certain way, and there's a lot more demands upon their appearances in sort of professional settings like law firms that men don't necessarily have. Not to say that men don't have to look professional, but there are more like specifics and sort of like judgment of women's appearances within many different spaces, but specifically like in this case, like law firms and things like that. And I think that like presenting that in a sort of interesting way through this sort of superhero metaphor, I think is really cool. And I'm not just saying that to be like, I'm trying to put my politics into the show. Like, the show is very clearly trying to evoke that with that sort of scene. And I in the constant, like, people demanding that she be She-Hulk or not be She-Hulk or be She-Hulk in different situations. And you see that in the bar, I think at the opening of the episode too, when sort of her boss at the time sort of comes up and demands that she turn into sort of human form. It's clearly meant to evoke like the demands on women's appearances that men place upon them. And I think that's really good. And I like those moments a lot more than the like, this dude's an asshole. Again, not to say that that isn't the case, but the show just has done it a few times already within 2 episodes, and it doesn't work as strongly for me. But like I said, there are nuanced things that this show is doing that I do really like. Another one, too, that I did like was her sort of worrying about, like, the fact that she feels like she only got this job because she is She-Hulk, which is also an argument that many, like, people will say about women in any jobs. Like, you only got it because you're a woman or because you're a marginalized identity. I mean, listen to the anti-woke folks that I was ranting about earlier, talking about like any sort of like non-white cis dude character in the MCU, and they'll pretty much make that same argument. Oh, they only got it because of, you know, the forced diversity of Marvel or whatever, which in some cases does have some validity to it, but the argument isn't that like you shouldn't have more diverse people. It's that you should allow diverse people to be better sort of represented and have more of a say in being able to sort of talk about these hiring practices that bring on more diverse people overall. And so there's sort of like an argument to be made there, and I think that the show sort of touching upon that, I think, is doing it really well. Even beyond, though, just like the political messaging of this that I've kind of focused on here, because it was sort of the thing that sort of came to mind and what sort of drew me into some of the better aspects of the show, I think that this show is just fun. Tatiana Maslany, like I said, just brings this like fun energy, and I love her like constantly talking and like talking over people and Bruce and just sort of like talking herself into things when she calls him, which I think was kind of fun. And I also love her sort of like having this conflict of interest being drawn into having to represent Abomination, who we knew was going to appear in this show. And so I was really excited to kind of see him come up. And I liked the joke that Mark Ruffalo makes at one point. He was like, I'm a new person, very clearly pointing to the fact that he's not Ed Norton, but that movie is still in continuity that we're even drawing from with Abomination. And I did like sort of Abomination's argument here that when, you know, she went to see him, that it's like, look, I was reformed. I thought I was doing the right thing. I was just working for the United States government. Like, I was taking the super serum that, like, I was told to take. And I think that that was, like, a really good argument. Obviously, we know that that's not the case, having seen the movie, that they had other sort of justifications from doing that. But I think, like, oh, if this is going to be a law story where she's defending, like, these bad people, that those moments are kind of interesting to sort of recontextualize past moments from Marvel movies in that way. And I think that that's kind of just cool, and I'm excited to see how the show continues moving with that forward. And then another few interesting things too is the show sort of connecting to other aspects of the MCU. Like, clearly at the end of the episode, we see the fact that Abomination has been appearing in those sort of fight clubs that we saw in Shang-Chi, and so that being a big issue that's probably going to be playing into the next few episodes, which I think is really, really cool, which also probably bringing in Wong, who we know is also going to be coming into the show too. So excited to see how that really connects here, and I'm loving that sort of extension of the larger MCU. Also, Bruce going away in space at the end of the episode. I wonder if that's going to be something that's going to be drawn into this show, given we've seen like space stuff come up in last episode as well, and so that's just going to be an ongoing background element to the series, or if that is setting him up to appear in the Secret Invasion show that's going to be coming out next, because I believe that is the next Disney Plus Marvel show that's on the horizon, is Secret Invasion with Nick Fury. So I'm curious if that's going to connect there, or if that's just in this show sort of thing. Either would be interesting to me, but the show hasn't given me much of a way either way whether it's going to go with both of those. The only other thing that I think is worth mentioning is the family scene. I thought was really sweet. Got to meet a family, and I liked that like they were very accepting of her being She-Hulk, and how normalized the conversation was. Like, oh, you know, being a superhero, you know, I had this guy, he said I wanted to be a superhero, so I gave him your number. It felt like a very, like, normalized family experience around this that clearly they would have, because Bruce has been Hulk. And again, not that, I think maybe the show is evoking this or not, like, it could have been just, like, a professional thing, like seeing superheroes as a job, but then there's also an aspect of, like, her, like, maybe it's relates to an LGBTQ experience because her dad says, like, look, this isn't the first time we've had a Hulk in the family, and them sort of being accepting and understanding of the problems that come along with that, and the troubles that she's going to face. And that very much resonated with me as a queer person. You know, I've had, you know, my parents are divorced, and on the family side that does have queer people within the family already, they kind of already knew what to do when to accept me as coming out as LGBTQ, at least a little bit. And so they had that experience versus the other side of my family who very much did not. And so it was very much more awkward on that sense. And so I think that sort of speaks to that experience. Again, whether the show is meaning to evoke that or not, it resonated with me, and I thought it felt very truthful, and I really liked her dad for that. Otherwise, this was just fun. I'm curious to see how this is going to continue with some of the law stuff, how they're going to show, like, those scenes. Also, we got the actress from last episode, Titania, who, like, attacked at the beginning of the episode, is the girl from The Good Place. I figured the actress's name off the top of my head, but I love her in The Good Place. So I'm curious if she was just a one-off cameo or if she's going to have a larger role within the show. I hope so, because I do like her as an actress. But beyond all of that, that's sort of my general thoughts on this. This was a strong second episode of She-Hulk, but what did you think of it? I'd love to hear all your thoughts down in the comments below. But beyond all of that, be looking for my Star Trek Lower Decks review later today. I am so excited. Lower Decks is back. My favorite TV show is back. I'm so pumped for it. That review will be up a little bit later this morning, so be on the lookout for that. But beyond all of that, thank you so much, everybody, for watching this, and I hope you all live long and prosper.